All right, well now that I've started, I will start again. And I will say good afternoon. I'm Angie Dodson, and it is on a day like today that I am reminded of the privilege that is mine in leading this institution. My intention is to stay very much focused on this art and their makers, this exhibition and its makers, who we're going to hear from and about very soon. But as is traditional, we're going to have to recognize a few people at the outset of the program. And to make sure that I do that completely and accurately, I'm going to have to put on these glasses and look down at this sheet of paper every now and again. At some point today, we are going to be joined by Mayor Stephen Reed. As a reminder to those of you who may be a little less familiar with the museum, we are a department of the city. This is Montgomery's museum. So we'll see when he shows up. He's kind of wearing two hats today, the dad hat and the mayor hat. So I understand he's downtown with the kiddo who is involved in some kind of performance. And we all know how that goes. So we will just welcome him when he joins us. I also want to recognize Northwestern University and their Block Museum of Art. Its formidable director, Lisa Cornum. Its very thoughtful curator, Janet Dees, who dreamed this exhibition into being. In addition to envisioning and realizing this exhibition, they were also able to attract some of the leading arts funders from our country to support this exhibition. Those include the National Endowment for the Arts, the Andy Warhol and the Terra foundations, and together those organizations helped the Block and Northwestern realize the exhibition first in Evanston and then bring it here to Montgomery. There are a few firsts involved in this project, and for me, this is one of the first exhibitions to pay equal mind to both the curation of the exhibition, the selection of the works, and the development of the interpretation around the works, and also give equal care and attention to the viewers who are to come and engage with these objects. So throughout the exhibition, you will see evidence of that care. There are opportunities for people to learn more throughout, and also to take breaks and process the enormity of the stories that are contained in this exhibition. Another first, at least for me, is that this new and kindred organization to us, the Block, really went above and beyond in their belief in the necessity to bring this exhibition to the South, and particularly to Montgomery. So I just want to give an extra moment to the way that they reached back out to those funding organizations, particularly to the Terra Museum, for the Terra Foundation for American Art, and ask them to extend their generosity, which they did, enabling us to bring this exhibition to Montgomery, and also position the staff to learn how to best engage with visitors coming to see these works and this exhibition. So we have just a great deal of friends, old and new, to thank that have enabled us to be here gathered today. So a collective thanks to all of those outside of this institution who have allowed us to be here together today, but also thanks to those inside the institutions who have been equally important in getting us to this day. There she is, Jennifer Jankowskis, the small pencil and paper gal, is actually the curator of contemporary art here at the museum, and she has been the site of struggle steward throughout this process, so I thank her for her investment in all that this is and has been to us. We also thank the collections, communications, development, education, and operations teams here at the museum for all that it has taken for us to realize this exhibition here in Montgomery. And to create this opportunity for us to share it with you as our first viewers of this exhibition, and that we are about to do. We're going to introduce this exhibition by way of conversation between its curator, Janet Dees, whose heart and mind I'm coming to know better each time our paths cross, and Rhonda Sewell, who is the Director of Belonging and Community Engagement at the Toledo Museum of Art. While I only know Rhonda by reputation and by her good work in Toledo, she is new to me and comes to us by way of our new friends at Blue Water Communications. So thank you very much for coming down to be with us and for also for your larger work in the space of social justice and community engagement in museums. So with all of that, I am going to hush it up and I'm going to turn our attention to Janet and to Rhonda, who will focus us on all that is this exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Again, I am Rhonda Sewell. I'm coming to you with the coolest title ever as Director of Belonging at the Toledo Museum of Art. And belonging encompasses DEAI strategies and guiding principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and also access, which is very important. I always begin conversations and talks by first acknowledging the indigenous populations and those who toiled the soil before this museum ever existed. So I want to just give a moment of silence for that. Thank you so much. And now let's get into a great conversation. I'm already admittedly a fangirl of Janet, so I can't hide my enthusiasm and also how proud I am for a curator to bring this subject to light and in this particular city. And Janet and I have talked about that prior to today's conversation about how important it was to bring her vision to a city like Montgomery, Alabama, the birthplace of the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks in 1955 ignited that movement. The first White House of the Confederacy being here. It's so much. And I want Janet to start us off by talking about how important it was to exhibit your work in this museum, MMFA, but also in this city.
Well, thank you for that question, Rhonda. As sort of Angie sort of said in her remarks, sort of talking about the ways in which we felt like it was really, really important for the exhibition to be both in the South, but I think particularly in Montgomery. I think personally, for me, I have family roots not far from this area, and so there was that kind of personal connection. But I think that the city itself, both in terms of its layered history, but also the institutions and organizations that are here and are present, who are holding this history of civil rights and are continually working in the city in the present to have that live into its fullest reality, create the perfect context for an exhibition like this to be in dialogue with that work. And I think, I visited with Jennifer and Angie, gosh, I guess it was over 3 years ago now when I first came down and met with them. And was also really inspired by the work that was also happening in this museum to kind of create context for this exhibition. So it's not just this exhibition that's doing this work, but the initiatives that they were starting, the kind of the exhibition program that they were engaging with, from Bethany Collins to Lava Thomas, who was here, the exhibition was here right before. So also saw how this exhibition being in dialogue with other movements within this particular institution. Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. Some of you, I know, this is your first introduction to the exhibit. Janet graciously took me on my own personal exclusive tour, so thank you for that, Janet. But walk us through that particular journey. What I'm really interested in is your own self-care through conceptualizing such heavy topics as the ones that are addressed here. So let me take the audience through kind of that journey of how a site of struggle even came to be in your mind.
Well, maybe I'll answer that question. I think there are like 3 questions within that question.
I always do that. I'm a journalist, I'm sorry.
So I'll take it apart and start with the inspiration and the inception for the exhibition. And for me, the development of exhibitions always began with artworks and my engagement with particular artworks that inspire me, that haunt me, that hit me in my heart, that cause me to think. And in this exhibition, there are a few key and core artworks that did that work. And you know, the exhibition is organized into 3 different sections, and within each of those sections, I'd say there's a kind of a core artwork that really inspired me. And this is, you know, the kind of seed of the idea for this exhibition goes back to 2015, but these are some of these artworks I first encountered over 20 years ago, and they have that impact. I kept haunting and asking these questions to look at the ways in which American artists have grappled with this issue of anti-Black violence, and to think about how this has been over a long duration, so just as long as this has been an issue and a problem within our country, artists have been grappling with that, and the need to kind of recoup that history and to kind of bring to the fore. In addition to those core artworks, which maybe I can talk about later, I know we'll do a little bit more of a deep dive into the exhibition. That was also intersecting with a kind of a contemporary landscape where we're still grappling with police brutality, police murder, incessant. But there was a lot of conversation that was happening, particularly in the art world, as if this was something new, and also as if contemporary artists' engagement with contemporary issues was something new. And so I felt that it was really important to put that kind of contemporary struggles and contemporary conversations into a longer art historical context, and also a longer art historical context. So I think that's the job there. Thank you for being with us. Now I have to. So those are some of the, kind of started with the artworks, and then that wanting to kind of contribute to the kind of contemporary conversation, so that there was more of an art historical consciousness around works that the ways in which artists have continually always have been engaged with us as an issue.
And then the next was just your own self-care because of, it's heavy subject matter. Some of the art pieces can be triggering. So your own self-care and wanting to bring all of this to light. Can you share that with us?
Sure. I think one of the most important things was I didn't do this work alone, right? So my name is, here as the curator, but this was a very collaborative project, both in terms of having other kind of scholars and curators and artists who were engaging with this material, but also what I sort of thought as a community of first users around me in Evanston. Students, faculty, staff, and members of our community locally in Evanston, Illinois, who are engaging with issues of racial injustice. And so I think working in community with others was number one in that care, knowing that you're not alone and having that opportunity to be with things that are arising and talk through things with others who understand where you are. I think second, always staying rooted in the reasons why, right? That this is not just about me, that this is bigger kind of mission that this work is doing, and kind of being grounded in that. I think third, also like knowing when you need to step back and when you need to walk away. I know in a conversation we were having earlier, you were talking about, professionals who are doing diversity work within institutions, where it's recommended that they only do that work for 5 years and then kind of step back and pass the baton just because of the psychological and emotional toll it takes. So I think sort of giving myself that space to understand that this isn't, it's not the same as curating an exhibition of Monet's water lilies, that you need to build in that space to kind of step back and close the book and walk away, meditate, take a walk until we can kind of come back to the work and continue on. So I think those are some of the core ways that I supported myself. Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. I read the catalog several times, and there's a quote that I lifted that you said, and I thought it was so moving to me because it really helped me to understand how to engage with the art. And if I can read it, you said their vision, meaning the artists who contributed, and willingness to shed light on that which is difficult to look at, but necessary to see, to bring us closer to the racial justice we seek. That, of everything in the catalog, moved me so much, your own words, because unlike other exhibitions, this almost calls the viewer to act. So can you talk a little bit about that, the engagement that these viewers will have with the pieces?
Well, first I'm kind of just taking in, I think that's the first time someone's quoted me back to myself before, so I'm just taking that in for a second. I think that there's a hope that, depending on who you are and what you're coming into the exhibition with, it's going to hit you in different ways and call you to move into act in different ways. So it may be that experiencing the exhibition is just opening up a space for you to sit with your own grief, your own mourning, and that is equally as valid as it inspiring you to take action and be more forthright and more direct in engagement. And one of the things that we shaped in terms of providing resources or things that were supporting the exhibition was in your visitor's guide. I wanted to pick one up, but I think, Mary, you want to hold that up? I just hold it up. So in the visitor's guide, we did this in Evanston, but also here too. There are lists of resources. So if you come out of the exhibition and you're like, I'm familiar with this history, this present I didn't realize was happening, and I'm inspired to take action, now what? Well, this is now what. There's a whole list of organizations that are based here in Montgomery that you can get involved with, that you can support, that you can go to get further education. And so really, I think, not just like leaving you with that emotion, but like kind of calling, providing at least a little bit of an opportunity for you to channel that work.
That is something Janet and I talked about, how the great care that was taken with this particular exhibition serves as a model in the museum field. Other works that may be challenging, the self-care guide that was created, the signage here in Montgomery, allowing you as the viewer to opt in. If you're not comfortable, you don't have to opt in. Even kind of the reading area here, the meditation space that you did at the block. It's a model for other exhibitions with heavy subject matter. So I applaud you as a curator, but the block and the staff, wonderful staff here at MMFA for taking such great care in such a powerful and profound exhibit. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to respond to that if I could, because the research into the content of the exhibition, or rather I should say the reverse, the research into how to create that structure and environment of care was just as important as the research into the content. So all of those things that you sort of listed, there's a kind of guide, asking visitors to participate in creating a respectful viewing environment, the guided meditation, the listing of resources, the spaces for the reading room, the invitation to use the grounds of this museum for quiet reflection. All of those things came out of conversations with other museum colleagues, conversations with folks within our own community about what they thought they would need to be supported, and then adapting that to this space, right? So again, that was where it can put forth this model, but it's also informed by conversations and the work of many others.
Thank you so much. I do want to get into the exhibit itself. We had conversations about pieces that sort of moved the most, but talk to us about the 3 categories and why this exhibit is distributed that way and what they each mean.
So as you said, this is an exhibition that's really focused on the different kinds of artistic strategies that artists have used as a way to get into this topic. And it is, in terms of the chronology covered by the exhibition, works, it sort of starts with the rise of anti-lynching activism in the 1890s and then ends with the founding of Black Lives Matter in 2013. So it's really thinking about a prehistory of our present moment. And it's not meant to be comprehensive, so it's not every single work that is engaged with that, because it wouldn't be able to fit in this whole museum, but enough so that you can get the sense of what was happening, and enough that we can actually engage, have the space to meaningfully engage with each work. So the exhibition is divided into 3 thematic sections that are focused on different kinds of artistic strategies. And with the choosing of these 3 sections, I was really conscious of the fact that, if you think about, you hear that a show is engaging with the issue of anti-Black violence, you might think that every single artwork is going to be very graphic or very in that way. But artists have been really creative and ingenious in the ways in which they have engaged with this topic over the years. So we wanted to highlight that with the way the exhibition is structured. So the first theme, which we're sitting in, is entitled Written on the Body. And this is a section where you'll see artworks where the Black body is present in the artwork, but it's not being shown as in the state of actively being victimized. And these are works where artists are also thinking about the kind of psychological impact of physical violence, but by violence in a more capacious or broader sense. So works that are engaging with the issues of mourning in the wake of violence. So there's to our right in the case, there's work by Emory Douglas from the Black Panther, Minister of Culture from the Black Panther Party, in which a mother is kind of accompanying her children to the work that's directly behind us in the 1930s by Doc Thrash, entitled After the Lynching, in which a family is taking care of someone who's been a victim of lynching. And 2 work by Carrie McWeens that's also on that back wall, that's thinking about the ways in which kind of constructions of beauty standards that are based on white supremacist models or another kind of form of violence, right? So opening up that category. The second theme is called Abstraction and Affect. And that is located in the gallery that's directly behind us, in that kind of long corridor that opens with Howard Dina Pendel's work, 4 Little Girls, which is a memorial to the victims of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. And this is a section that is looking at the ways in which artists have used abstraction or other kinds of conceptual strategies to again avoid literal representations of violence while engaging with this issue. And it demonstrates the ways in which even if work isn't graphic, it still has the potential to be really emotionally effective and resonant. And then there's the final section, which is kind of behind us in the corner intentionally, is entitled A Red Record. And this is the section that focuses on the ways in which artists have used more graphic strategies to engage with this issue of anti-Black violence. It's the title of the section is after a pamphlet, A Red Record, by the anti-lynching activist Ida B. Wells. And there is an original copy of her 1895 pamphlet that's included in that section. And you'll notice that it is sort of tucked in that corner intentionally because it is this more graphic material. We felt it was really important to emphasize visitor choice so that there are content warnings and you have the opportunity to decide whether or not you're in a place where you want to engage with that material. And it's also a space where it's not continuously in your sightlines as you engage with the rest of the exhibition. And then next to that, there's this section that's an extension of the Red Record section, but in some ways is its own section that includes work by Carrie James Marshall, but also, from the 2000s, but also Reginald Marsh, who's a white Canadian-American realist from the 1830s, that is looking at works that takes the lens off of African Americans as the victims of violence and turns it around to look at spectators and perpetrators to this violence. So for example, there's a whole series by Ken Gonzalez-Day that's entitled Erased Lynchings. And so what he's done is appropriate historic lynching photographs, but then has gone in and digitally removed the bodies of the victims so that what you're faced with are the folks who are in the crowds at these sites, so that you're looking at those white spectators and perpetrators and the landscapes in which they took place. As an example. Yeah.
Very powerful. And that preface in A Red Record, the original there, is by Frederick Douglass, I read. So please take the moment to read that. You mentioned a white artist, and you intentionally and purposely included non-Black artists within this showcase. In addition to Black artists. And we talk in modern times about allyship and how important that is, but also just actual stories of non-Blacks who lost their lives in the civil rights movement, fighting alongside for racial justice and social justice and civil rights. Tell me, because there is some controversy in the museum field and the art field about doing just that. So, but you were intentionally and purposely using non-Black artists within this exhibition. Tell us your thinking behind that.
Thank you for that question. And so the majority of the artists in the exhibition are African American, but there are a few who are not, a few white artists, Japanese American artists, Asami Gucci. And for me, and as you said, there's been a lot of debate and controversy about, is it this subject, is it something that is proper for artists who are not Black to engage with? But for me, it was really important to highlight those works by, and particularly white artists who were supportive of Black activist causes, and those that are present who are doing that and are very attentive and a sensitive way to the subject matter, even if it is imperfect at times, as a way of, as you said, kind of tracing this kind of lineage of allyship and solidarity, right? So that people that are present who are coming to the museum can see that there are ancestors that they can draw upon to be doing that good work, right? And be present the same way that we're tracing this lineage of violence, right? So that was something that's really important to me. So as one example, Reginald Marsh, that I mentioned earlier, was a white American artist working in the 30s and the 40s, and he created this drawing entitled "This Is Her First Lynching," and this was in the 30s, and it's a drawing in which there's a crowd that's assembled. They're looking outside of the picture plane to what you presume is a lynching that's taking place, so you can't see a victim. But you focus on this crowd, and there's someone who's holding up this young girl to try to get a better look. So that there was this white artist who was brave enough in the 1930s to say, look, this violence is being socialized into your art. This is what's happening to kind of turn that lens onto the community. And he donated that drawing to the NAACP, their national headquarters in New York. And they used that as part of their kind of visual toolkit in their organizing around trying to support anti-lynching legislation. So that's just like one example of that.
When we went around together, Janet, you were talking about the various pieces, and there were several that, if you feel comfortable sharing with our audience today, that really moved you in a particular way. I know that was one of them, but can you reveal some of those pieces and why they moved you in the selection of the artwork for this exhibition?
Sure, I can do that. I just think there's so many. Well, there's one that's in this section that maybe I'll talk about because it's one that maybe without this conversation might be difficult for people to stay with. So just behind the wall to my left, there's a video piece. The sound's turned off right now because we're having a program. But there's a video work by artist and poet siblings Carl and Karen Pope, they're fraternal twins. And it's a piece entitled Palimpsest that was created in 1999. And I first saw this work about over 20 years ago, about 22 years ago. And it's a video piece that's documenting 3 different acts that the artist is having enacted on his own body. So the first action is branding of a Adinkra symbol onto his skin. For those of you who don't know, Adinkra symbols are kind of Ghanaian, Akan symbols that are essentially like visual proverbs. And this particular one is entitled Aya, which means I am not afraid of you. I know when I was talking to the staff yesterday, there's one of the staff members has a tattoo, and it's Sankofa, which is another kind of really well-known symbol that we use. So in doing this branding, he was both recalling and kind of calling forth the history of branding being used as an act of violence against the enslaved body, but then by having the Adinkra symbol branded, and particularly this I am not afraid of you, he's like reversing that and also creating it as a sign of protection for himself. In the second act, he has an incision, it's kind of a surgical incision made into his arm, and the skin is lifted up, and a light is shown through the skin, so you can see just how thin this layer of skin is, in which our pigmentation is held. It's so thin, and yet there's so much that has been put into it. And then the third act, he has a tattoo that is tattooed across most of his body. And this tattoo is an excerpt from a poem that his sister wrote. And the poem is also recited as the soundtrack of the video. And it's a poem that is engaging with this idea of double consciousness, this idea as a Black person being very aware of who you are and your own interiority, but then constantly having to negotiate how others perceive you and the fears that others are projecting on you as you move through the world. And I remember when I first saw this piece, it is difficult to look at. It's very visceral, you kind of feel it in your body. But I also remember that moment where it clicked for me about how, yes, maybe this is difficult to look at, but the histories and the present threats and violence that he is calling forth the work are 10 million times more painful and 10 million times more difficult. And so there was this like very, like the turn of the poetry. And so in some ways it's one of the more difficult pieces, but for me it was also one of the most powerful. And it was one of the ones that was one of those core works that kind of haunted me that helped with the eventual formation of this exhibition.
Go ahead, were you going to say the other one that we talked about?
There's another work in the abstraction section, and you'll see it's maybe unassuming because there's a record in a case, and then a set of headphones next to it, so you might pass it by. But this is a piece by a white Swiss-American contemporary artist named Christian Marfay, and it's called Guitar Drag. And this is a piece that he made after being profoundly shaken by the murder of James Byrd Jr. in Jasper, Texas. And so what you encounter here is the soundtrack to a video work that Marfay made, in which he's basically reenacting Byrd's murder by being dragged to death behind a pickup truck, but instead of a body, he uses the guitar. So the guitar is tied to the tailgate and it's plugged into an amplifier that's in the truck bed. And so the soundtrack becomes the sound of the guitar breaking apart. And I remember the first time I saw that work, it was probably also around 20 years. Wow, I've been doing this a long time. It was in a large group exhibition in a museum in New York, and there wasn't an explanatory label with the work. There was just the title of it and the object information. And so I walk in and I see this piece, and of course I immediately get the reference to it. And it's very emotional, it's very visceral, it's very powerful. And I was thinking about how effective a strategy that was to avoid this kind of very literal representation of violence, but it was still so powerful in invoking that. And I was very moved by it. But being a curator museum person, one thing I also do is I watch other people, how they interact with work in the space. And I noticed that, you can tell who was coming in with that information and who wasn't. That people kind of coming in like laughing because they did not know that reference of James Byrd murder. So on the one hand, I started thinking about how powerful abstracted works can be, that they can avoid that direct literary representation and still engender this really emotional effect. But also there's this danger too, if they're too opaque, that part of that point is missing, and that's something that I wanted to explore. So that whole section about abstraction is really kind of looking at that, the different ways in which artists have used abstraction, but also in this iteration, there are explanatory labels with everything, so you have that information you need to know what the artists are grappling with.
Thank you, Janet. You also talked earlier about the support of colleagues, associates, other curators, even other museums in conceptualizing a site of struggle. But I was so moved by your conversation, and your amazing director is here at the Block Museum at Northwestern in Chicago, or Evanston, I should say, that there was such support with this exhibit. I'm always in DEAI work, always ready for a fight, right? That I'm like, how difficult was this to present this proposal? And you gave me a fascinating and hopeful, conversation that it was very easy because this conceptualization was in your interview with the Block Museum. So kudos to the director and all the staff. at the Block Museum. But talk about that support of an organization to bring such a heavy topic like this to light.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It reminds me of a question that I had gotten asked in another interview, where someone asked me about like advice that I might give to other curators in doing this kind of work, and I said like thinking about like choosing the institutions that you work in wisely, because it's like there'll always be battles to fight, but you don't need to fight all the battles all the time. And so yes, so it was in my interview, the seed of this project was with me, and I shared that in the interview, and for it to be received with openness and understanding, I was like, okay, I can go work there. And so I think that does make a very important difference. So both in terms of, and I think this is the same thing, you know, when I came here and I first met with Jennifer and Angie the first time, that there was also that, okay, yeah, this is important, and I got that there wasn't that kind of resistance. So both in terms of all this, you know, this was a really collaborative effort both outside of the museum, but also in terms of all the staff at the Block, the engagement department, every department in the museum, as well as, you know, I did have the benefit of originating this in a university art museum, and so there's a very rich collection of scholars who are experts in different aspects of African American history, who are teaching, who use the exhibition as a teaching resource in their classrooms, that kind of help support that development. So I think it's very important. There's a video in the gallery to the right here that has excerpts of interviews with myself and 4 other colleagues who were instrumental in the development of ideas around the exhibition, so you can get a sense of them talking about why it was important for them to support the project and what that was like from their perspective.
And before we move into our question and answer period, I know you were given pieces here to write your own questions down. I wanted to ask you, in particular, Janet, about action steps. I know in the self-care guide and other things, there are pieces and advice and resources that you have carefully curated, but as viewers here, some have already walked through, others have not. Tell us what those action steps should be. How do we engage with the work? Or is there a set guidance to that?
Yeah, well, that's a really great question. I think you have so many great questions. I think my first sort of action is just to ask everyone to approach the exhibition and the artwork with open hearts and open minds, and to allow the work that the artist is doing to be open to like and penetrate you, and then to guide you toward the action that is appropriate for who you are in this world and what your position is, right? So I said earlier that just may be being open to the possibility of art as a way of processing your own grief, you're processing your own reality of a Black person in this world, negotiating this and thinking as a resource. For others, it might be a call to action to get more involved directly in organizations. For others, it might be, how can I facilitate some of those difficult conversations that I've been avoiding within my own, group. Also, in the visitor's guide, there's a set of reflection questions that we developed in conversation, with the community that can kind of aid in that reflection and those conversations amongst groups. So I'd say those are, just some ways that I would suggest. Yes.
Thank you. And is there anything that we did not cover, Janet, that you want to conclude with before we ask for Q&A from the audience?
I think what I just said is probably a good kind of conclusion from my perspective, and then we'll see as we get questions, it might spark something else that I want to share.
Let us give this wonderful curator, Janet Dees, a round of applause. Yes, at this point, Jennifer will collect the questions, and then we'll move right into our Mayor, thank you so much. Did you want to say a few words? No. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. And we don't have to be so formal. I'll read these and we'll address those, Janet, but also if you do have a question, please just raise your hand and ask us. So I will start here with the first one. Okay. So the first question is, have there been any protests or complaints or any type of pushback against the exhibition? Good question. If so, what do they generally say?
Well, I can only, we were just opened here, so I can only speak to our experiences at the block. And actually, I think we were prepared for the possibility of there being more pushback than there actually was. I think I was really inspired and moved by how the communities really embraced the exhibition and used it as a resource to support work that was ongoing in the community. And so we had engagement from groups as diverse from interfaith, church groups within the community using it as a resource for their own DEI work, to palliative care faculty from our medical school, seeing it as an opportunity to help deepen their understanding about what care for Black patients would look like in the context of the work that they're doing. So it was really well received and embraced and utilized as a resource. Early on in the process, before the exhibition was mounted, there were some, as I said, I did a lot of talking and listening with various constituents within our community, including some of our students. And there was some concern from some of the graduate students about the exhibition because they're living in a time, with George Floyd and protesting of everything, and feeling so saturated by that, and about whether or not, they wanted to engage. But I think once the exhibition was mounted and they saw the ways in which all that input and care and how it was put together, none of those reservations came to light. They really embraced it.
Thank you for that question. The next question, what did you discover while working on this exhibit that maybe surprised you? And also, the second half is, what other cities will the exhibit travel to?
So I'll answer the last one first because it's a quicker one. So Montgomery will be the final stop for this exhibition. It was in Evanston, just right outside of Chicago, for almost 6 months, and we'll be here through November. In terms of surprises, I think there are a couple of artworks that were surprising. Even though I had known about them, I think having the opportunity to kind of sit with them more deeply was sort of surprising and encouraging. So I think about the Reginald Marsh artwork I talked about, where the kind of bravery of an artist in that time period to kind of turn the mirror on the way in which it's how white populations are being socialized into violence rather than what had been a more common strategy of focusing on victims. And similarly, there's an artist, George Biddle, who has a work that thinks about that in terms of, in a different way, sort of thinking about it around gender. So I think in that work was also created in the 30s. So I think those things were surprising once I had the time to kind of sit with them and really think about that larger historical context.
Thank you. There's a statement and also a question related. So this is a powerful exhibition, and they're thanking you, Janet, for also addressing self-care and the compassion fatigue many may experience in reflecting on progress or the lack thereof in the social justice arena. And the question is, did the artwork selected inform the exhibition, or did the exhibit inform the selection of the artwork? Great question, whoever posed that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it was a little bit of both, but really it was the artworks that informed the development of the exhibition. So I talked about a few of those artworks, the Carl McCarran book piece, the Christian Mark Clay piece. And so it was kind of this like a cumulative effect over many years of seeing how the ways in which artists were grappling with and engaging with this issue that then kind of prompted like deeper research to see, okay, how is this done, in different time periods I wasn't as familiar at, and kind of to get a larger scope of how artists were engaging with that topic. So probably more of the art, and then once that the art kind of framed the topic, then it kind of guided then where I would do for the research.
Thank you so much, whoever asked that. It's a great question. Are there any other questions that we missed? I see people writing, but yeah. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. Okay. I'm just reviewing, so I don't have my cheaters today, so you see how far this one was out. But it's not your writing, you have very good handwriting here, sir. So the Life magazine picture asks questions about the use of pictures like this as sort of creating fear among the subjected population. So can you talk about the fine line of educating to prevent future acts of violence versus trying to scare victims into silence and inaction? That's a great question.
It's a great question, and I'm glad that they invoked that work, because that was another one of the works that was core in the development of the exhibition. So the audience member is alluding to work that's in the Red Records section by an African-American artist named Pat Williams that's entitled Accused, Blowtorch, Padlock. And at the center of that work are reproductions of photographs of a lynching victim that were reproduced in Life magazine in the 1930s. And around that, the artist is writing questions and statements and interrogating the existence of this image. So asking things like, who took this photo? Couldn't he have just as easily let the man go? Can you be black and look at this? Right, so in that work was created in the 80s, so already then asking these questions, this is actually a question that we're still grappling with now in terms of circulation of imagery, but also the NAACP and other actors were grappling with in the 1920s and 30s about using lynching photography, understanding that dance about using it as evidence, but also understanding what the psychological risks were. So that's been something that it's not a new debate, it's been going on for over 100 years. And so I think you know, with this exhibition, and I think with it really tried to walk that line and kind of keep different audiences in mind, right? And particularly thinking about like care of the most vulnerable coming in, so thinking about care of you know, Black visitors as central, and then like working out from there. So for example, in the exhibition, like you won't see any video footage of actual, you know, acts. There's no lynching photography in the exhibition. The only time you see it is when artists are creating a context around it or kind of pushing against it, so it's not on its own. And thinking about, like, that's also like the question I think that these artists have been grappling with in developing these different strategies about it, how art can be not only about protesting and educating, but also can be used as a form of memorialization, as a form of mourning, as a form of holding space to process and grief. So it has these multiple purposes. It's not only to educate, but it also does like emotional and psychological work.
Thank you, Janet. And I will use these cheaters. Thank you. Oh, God, just like a new world. Which of the three themes of the exhibition may be most effective in telling the experience of violence against ethnic
I mean, I think they're all effective in different ways, and I think part of the strategy of the exhibition, but I also think part of the strategy of the artist is understanding that, like, some, you know, people may need that, like, direct, in your face, you know, more graphic material in order for it to, like, resonate, you know, with them, whereas the more abstract work might open up space for another, you know, visitor who doesn't need that, who's seen everything, who doesn't need the visual, you know, graphic reminder, who has those images in their mind and kind of just needs that space for mourning. So I think each of the themes are, or like this space in particular that thinks about how, you know, we often maybe just think about the incident of violence or the physical violence itself, but not all those other reverberations, right? And so I think they're all, each of the themes are effective in different ways, and they hit and connect with different people in different ways.
Thank you. Is there anything that I missed? No? Okay, well, we will conclude. And Janet, I just want to say that I want to thank you personally on behalf of this audience, if they will allow me to just thank you for conceptualizing something like this that is so important in the times that we're living in right now. But I think that quote from earlier in the catalog that you said, that even this talk, the education and understanding and unpacking the three categories, just in the hour or so that we've been here, you have brought us all closer to the racial justice that we do seek. So thank you for teaching us how to interact with the artwork, but also telling us really your heart, your vision of conceptualizing all of this. And, you know, we must thank also all of the artists, living and dead, who contributed to this work as well. So I want to thank you as a wonderful audience for just supporting art, but supporting the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. This is a beautiful place. This is my first time being here. And I am so proud to be in Montgomery, Alabama. Even getting off of the plane in the little tiny airport, I was reminded, we have a tiny airport in Toledo too, so, but I was just reminded of all of that history, just right even the impact of having a black mayor come and walk in here and sit, you know, and go off to his next event. All of this is so meaningful, and what you've done here is really educated us into action, and I hope that we bring others here to see what may be difficult to look at, but necessary to look at. So thank you so much, and parting words. Yes.
I have a concluding thing to say. That, okay, so after this, obviously we want, you know, spend time here. This exhibition is open until 5, but there is another exhibition in the corridor gallery. It's called Power for Change. Power for Change. I have the title right? Yeah. So I see Iris in the audience. She's one of the organizers of it, and so an exhibition of the artwork of young people here in Montgomery, kind of expressing, you know, what they're doing to be resilient and forward-looking. So I also want to encourage everyone to see that exhibition as well before you leave today. Okay. So that was my conclusion. See, I knew it was something that would come.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much.